Hello, I'm Diego or Luis Diego. You can call me however you want. Oh, whoopsies. Um, so I'm going to talk a little bit about test-driven delivery. It's going to be like more of a short story. I kind of have to apologize because the title is a little bit clickbaity. It's probably not going to be so much about like tips and tricks and N2E, probably just like this, or maybe some tips and tricks, or not tricks, but just tips. So it's just going to be a short story. I decided not to go with a lot of code or very technical things. Although, yeah, like with technical, I mean like with code, because I really wanted to focus on the way that this works. I think this is I would call it like sort of a process similar to test-driven development, but this is more wholesome in terms of the team. And in the end, it's just a compilation of a way to implement features. So yeah, if there's a lot of interest in this, because I've had some people tell me that this sounds very interesting, maybe there could be a second part of it, and maybe that's just me, inviting myself for a second talk. But so test-driven delivery. So we adopted this way of working when I was working about 2 years ago in a team. It was a small team. I was working in a company that does translations. They had been working for many years in the traditional way, which probably meant they used Excel to do everything. And now they wanted to create their own ERP for managing their system, so they called it a language management system. And by the time I joined, my boss already, like the tech lead, was already trying to leverage end-to-end testing as much as he could, because the team was really small. We were only 4 devs at the time. We were all full stack, and we all had like multi-functions, or multifunctional roles. We all had to do our development. We had to do some DevOps sometimes. And also we needed to do all the end-to-end and like the QA part of all things. So in an attempt to not waste a lot of time that we could be developing, we sort of wanted to leverage the power of end-to-end testing for that. And in a way, it is similar to test-driven development in the sense that test-driven development relies on short development cycles where there's this very specific test case, and then you write the adequate functions or code to make the test pass. And test-driven delivery works in a similar idea, but you might be asking yourself, why? And this came from one time that I was just new to the team. Usually features there took like about 3 months to make because they were like big features, and we had to do everything, we just had to implement everything from the front end to the back end to almost where it ran, like dealing with the servers and everything, and also having to deal a lot with the product owners. Or the project manager was also my boss, who was like the tech lead. But yeah, it was kind of a difficult, like a lot of things to do. And during one of my first features that I was implementing, I took, I grabbed it, I started working on it for like 2 months. Then I don't know why, I went to the team and said like, hey guys, like, do you want to see what I'm doing? And it turns out that nobody liked what I was doing because the implementation was really not that good. At least for me it was, but for them it wasn't, and they had a way better way of doing it. And so we had like this, we had the situation where I had taken a lot of time working on something very specific that should have been avoided long ago. So in the end, instead of taking like 3 months, I took like about 4 months to deliver this feature and everything. So we wanted to do something, about it. So that's where we didn't really come up with it. It was my my boss's like idea already, and this probably has a name already. I don't know. I would be really happy if someone actually like knows about this and tells me like, you know, any links or whatever to anything. So we didn't really come up with this ourselves, but we did really shape the whole idea and adapted it to our needs. And yeah, like we all shaped it together in a way. So the key features that I've compiled is like the end-to-end testing is the test part and test driven. So the whole thing, like, yeah, everything that's defined as a feature is defined in an E2E specification, which is just like a user story of sorts. And this is what we use as the source of truth for pretty much everything. We only implement only what the specification defines, nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. We also implement short feedback loops to avoid, you know, spending 2 months working on something and then figuring out it was probably not the best way to do it. And also you eliminate the chance of working on things that probably the PO doesn't want, or eliminating the possibility where you skip over something that should be important. And we also, the whole point of the process is that we have an end-to-end suite, and you work on an implementation, and the final deliverable that you do and how you close the ticket is when your test passes within the end-to-end suite. And also, this is we rely a lot on this. So the whole suite passing is pretty much our QA. So it's our quality confirmation. It's what lets us know that everything is working as we expect. And this is, yeah, like this. So end-to-end takes a very, very big part of the whole process, because we rely on it to not only find bugs, but to know that we don't break anything when we implement new things. And in the end, it proved to be successful when, you know, we involved everyone in the process, like from POs to project managers to developers. Everyone was into it. It took some time, but it proved to be very successful. We cut down the development times from start to release in the terms of weeks. It's hard to define because of the features that we worked on, but we like that, which usually took up to 3 months. We could finish it within 2 months, or even 1 week or 2 weeks less, depending on how complicated it was. And everyone involved in the process was the key to success. And that was a big team effort. And it took a lot of time again, but in the end, it was very, very, very good, and it paid off. And to talk a little bit about the end-to-end spec, this is what we had. So again, we kind of used what we had at the time to deal with all this. So we just took whatever we had. So we wrote the specifications on a Google Docs file, and then shared it with everyone because that was easy. And then, yeah, that's how we did it. And this is what it would look like when a PO would ask for a feature. They would ask, I need, you know, I'm going to talk about like pizza or something. So so he would ask, I need a new feature, and this is the new part that I need. And he or she would go and write all the specification with very specific steps that can be easily translated into end-to-end code. And now you might be wondering how. And so I'll take you on the journey from inception to release, or I'll try, of a feature and the end-to-end specification, which is again the source of truth. So again, I said like we're going to be working with pizza. So, you know, I was hungry when I was doing this presentation. So yeah, all I could come up with was pizza. And let's imagine that we have a pizza delivery management system. So it's not only about ordering pizza, but this is like the whole ERP situation as well, where as manager of the pizza place or as an employee or whatever, I can create a new pizza, for example, you know, add pineapple to this one and call it Hawaiian or something. And if it's already in the system, so it's just this basic adding, editing, and removing operations. It's basically what I would like you to imagine that you can do in the system besides ordering. So you can do everything like creating users, creating pizzas, creating invoices, receipts, everything. And let's also assume for this time that the basics are implemented. So user logging, the basic pizza ordering is already there. And now we want to add some different behavior for the pizza ordering page. So we're going to call this PMS, for Pizza Management System. And we want to add a new type of pizza, which is going to be a pizza calzone, for example. And it really, I mean, let's say it really varies from a normal pizza in the sense that it has like more fields that are different. I have no idea how that would be different in reality because I don't know about pizzas, but yeah. So the PO wants to make sure that we can add a pizza with a type calzone, and it has different attributes. So he has the new feature request, and the first thing he should do is create a new ticket in either Jira or whatever you're using. Back then we were using Jira or Jira, I don't know how to say it. And he create the description, the mockups, the frames, whatever he needs, but also he would create an end-to-end spec, which, as I touched on a little bit before, it's sort of like user stories, but they're not really that short. They're very, very, very verbose and very, very specific. So it could be like epics, but I would not really call it an epic, I would say. Again, it's the only source of truth. So everyone who wants to know how something works, from like, I don't know, from anyone who's involved in business to the developer, to the lead, anyone can just come and read this and understand what they should expect. It's important to be idempotent, so we can really confirm or rely on it so that it will run anywhere. And this is usually written by the feature requester. It should be as detailed as possible, as I said, so everyone has an idea of what it's doing. And something that's also important is that it should be final after closing the ticket. So once you close the ticket, there should no longer be changes to it, because that could turn into problems. I think this is more of something we learn in the end, I would say. So now I'm going to talk about how it looks from the point of view of a developer. So a developer grabs a ticket. He would review the ticket, going over what the description is, what they want, all the frames, everything. And also he or she would go over the end-to-end spec. And I'm gonna jump to that now. And as you can see here, I tried to be, like I said, it should be as detailed as possible, but at some point when everyone is involved and when everyone knows how to work with this, there are some things that can be avoided. For example, user creation. Pretty much with almost all the test cases that we have, we pretty much have to create a new user, or yeah, mostly. So there's a very specific, there should be like a very specific end-to-end specification for how to create a user. So here on the first lines, we can pretty much omit some of that here. So we can just say like log in with an admin and create a new user with this information, instead of just going step by step of, click new user, add this to a specific label and everything. And as we can see where this is highlighted, this is how the one who created this end-to-end spec would highlight what's new and what we need to do here. So what's not highlighted is already existing. If you run this and then like you could go to the application now and you would be able to do all this, but not the highlighted part. So you would go like, so here there's new things. Choose calzone from the type dropdown. Probably the type dropdown doesn't exist by now. So as a developer, I would go to the PO and say, hey, the type dropdown doesn't exist. So maybe we should do an assertion first. You know, everyone's involved in this. And then you could just go over, click save and all this. You probably don't see it here, but where it says assert the pizza, whatever, does not exist, but the other exists. I've highlighted it there and put a comment that says feedback loop 1. And I'm going to refer to that later. But this is how we used to work. This is how we did everything. And then after we have reviewed everything, we come up with a design document that then is approved by the whole team. And we set a spec goal, which is what I showed you there. That was sort of commented, but it didn't really look highlighted differently. And we set up a feedback loop meeting, which is basically where we show anyone involved, in this case, a PO, whoever is interested in this feature to be released. We show the suite or the end-to-end, like specific end-to-end test running automatically to them. So they would see all this running. So they would go to the admin page, choose calzone from the drop down, click save, go back to pixel management, et cetera, et cetera. So they would agree that everything is working correctly, and we would make sort of short but very, very short steps. And then we would repeat this over and over until we reach the end of the end-to-end specification for that specific thing. And then comes the last part, where we need to integrate the end-to-end that we just created with the whole end-to-end suite, which sounds kind of simple, but I think that was one of the more complicated problems, because this here would also depend on what your team wants to achieve and how you want to run the end-to-ends. In our case, we were running everything in parallel. So creating a new test would be disruptive sometimes in terms of performance, or if you were not careful enough, you could break other tests while doing this. And then, yeah, like here you would compare, or like here you would test your implementation against the whole system. Yeah, this is kind of sometimes it would slow us down a little bit, but in the end, we kind of got used to it, kind of got a balance. And that's pretty much how the whole process works. I would say we have delivered the feature driven by end-to-end. That was the story basically of how a mistake I made and how a delay I had was turned into a systematic way of preventing delays in the future. And I want to talk now a little bit about the downsides that I see with this. And then I also promised tips, so tips are coming. One of the downsides that I see, I mean, it really worked for us really well because of how the whole team was set up. It was very small. I would say there were not enough resources to have a dedicated QA team, but even with the QA team, I think this could still work. But we had a huge dependency on end-to-end testing. If for whatever reason the end-to-end testing was not working correctly, or it was not performing well, or we could not have a good logging, we would be sort of stuck on this because we put so much importance on end-to-end that if something breaks, not only with the application, you would still have to have some development time dedicated to fixing all the end-to-end tests, especially running together. And it's very easy to sort of be very tightly coupled with the framework that you choose. This happened to us in the beginning. We started with a framework called Nightwatch.js. It's pretty good. It worked for us in the beginning. But then for what we needed, it started lagging down a bit, and it started showing a lot of false negatives, I would say, like a lot of the end-to-end like specific tests were failing, but if you ran them individually, they would pass. So it I would say there was a problem with idempotency there. So then we changed to Test Cafe, and then we tried to decouple our code as much as we could from the framework. Another downside is that everyone, or anyone who's, well, everyone pretty much, who is involved in this needs to learn more things. As a product manager, you need to, or product owner, you would need to think more about the steps and instead of just ideas. I mean, I've never done a role of a PO, so maybe I'm just like oversimplifying things here. But when writing user stories, yeah, we found that it was sometimes at the beginning was kind of difficult to just think of very specific steps. We would have a lot of specs that just said create a new user, but it didn't specify anything. And for developers, it also meant learning end-to-end testing, getting, developing more time or investing more time, not only on developing the app, but also maintaining an end-to-end suite. Involving everyone can take time and effort again. And as I mentioned before, performance can sometimes be a trade-off when you want to have everything working all the time. And that can take a lot of time, especially from developers. And in this way that we work, the specs can get really big, really bloated. And I remember having some features that I was working on that had up to like 20 pages where, I don't know, like 5 of them were just new things, for example. So, and going over all that can be very time consuming, but in the end, we made it work because of the good things that it had. I'm gonna kind of rush a bit on the tips here because I don't have a lot of code to show, so maybe some of these things will not make a lot of sense, but we learned sort of the hard way that idempotency is the king, and the better and more you log, the happier you will be, because you really need to know with such big end-to-end tests and cases, you really want to know where an error is happening, and instead of just going over either the whole app or the whole feature in the app or the whole test for that feature on the end-to-end suite. And sometimes you really need to know your framework, because this is both related to idempotency and logging, because sometimes an end-to-end framework can swallow some of the logs or the stack traces and just show you, for example, a drop down failed, but in your test you have 15 drop downs, and which one is it? So a good logging strategy goes a long way. Code organization as well. We learned this when we're using Nightwatch and switched to Test Cafe. We tried to organize code by feature, which we were already doing, but then we also moved from abstract to specific. So if you have a specific test file, you could have only like very abstract code, sort of like create new user, but not really get into specific things. And then behind this have other functions that do some other abstract things until you get to a point where a function is specific to the framework. And that way you don't, I mean, in a way you don't, like, you can just switch that framework to something else and it will still work theoretically. Also, we use a lot of feature flags and toggles for everything that we did, and this proved to be very, very useful, because at any point where we had a feedback loop approved, we would create a pull request, so we could ship this feature already to production and only activate it when a feature flag was active or not. And that really made it easy on everyone, especially during pull request reviews. That was very good. Also, a great tip I would have is creating E2E components for specific components in your app is very useful. For example, if you have a custom dropdown or a multi-select or a date picker, it is very useful to have a specific end-to-end component, or a component in your end-to-end suite that, you can just call, I want a new date picker, and then I can just like select specific dates, or select today, select yesterday, something like this. It would really help speed things up. Relying as much as possible on the M2M framework is also very useful, because sometimes there are things that can be very difficult to make in a framework, like getting the state of a certain element in the page, and then you might be tempted to use some plain JavaScript for that, but then that creates more chaos, I would say, and also it can be less reliable, and the logging can be also screwed up that way. Always create new data for every test. If you rely on the same data for different tests, you could potentially run into different dependencies. If you create one pizza that's type pie or like pizza, but then you edit it to be a calzone, in one test you might be expecting it to be a pizza and not the other. So that would just totally break the test, and then it's kind of hard to identify these bugs. Having several versions of a specific method in the end-to-end suite is very useful, because you can have a very general create a user method, but then also you might need to assert some specific things. So you might want to have a function create user asserting email or whatever, something like this. Having different versions can be very useful and help readability as well. And the last one that I have is to add all the cases to the specification, even when they seem obvious, in the sense of, let's just click on the type drop down, but it might be obvious, but you might forget to assert that the type exists, and then for whatever reason it's not, and your whole text is going to break, and then you have something that you haven't really accounted for. I have a tiny bit of code that I wanted to share just to illustrate. This is not like real working code. I just wanted to share some of the ideas that I had specifically with the managing or the organization of code from abstract to specific. So the code in the left would be the pizza calzone type end-to-end implementation. And then if you see just in the lower part where it says test pizza calzone type, you have very abstract things as login page, login default, which would mean log in with the default user that, like end-to-end user or something like mocked and everything. You can navigate to the user page. You can create a new user, create a new pizza, create just a plain pizza where you don't, create plain would refer to creating without asserting a lot of other things and so on. That's how we would usually do it. And then we would have the user page that extends a page, which this still is kind of abstract in itself, in the sense that it's not really using code from the framework specifically. It's still doing some things like wait for page load, and then find user in the grid, then open user, et cetera, that can be in the page. While the page, or even further down the hierarchy, you can have the framework specific code. How are you going to wait for it? I don't know, Tescafe uses a wait, like async await I'm sorry, the assertions for existence are asynchronous and all this. So you would have everything there. That's that's what I wanted to illustrate, and that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and if you have any questions, now's the time.
Thanks, Lou Diego. That was awesome talk. We do have one question which has popped up in the Q&A function. So I'll read it out now. Drawback of big amount of E2E tests is usually increased complexity of CI maintenance. Ghost test pipeline is not green for 100% for the same code, big amount of time to run all tests. You talked about running tests in parallel. Did you handle that problems somehow else?
Yeah, sometimes that was the biggest bottleneck we had all the time. What we tried to do, this was very, I would say, manual work. We started just, trying to like to tweak, like how many tests can we run in parallel with our within our environment that it's going to be still reliable. At some point we were running up to like 6 or 7 at a time, but then as the tests started becoming bigger, yeah, that was a bigger problem. And the way we solved it was what we came up with that was the easiest was just to repeat tests. So we would just queue them up again. You would have, I don't know, set up 8 tests to run in parallel. If like all those who failed there were just queued up to be run again after everything else is run. And also we tried the strategy of breaking down some of the tests. But yeah, this is the biggest bottleneck, and I would say that's like one of the more complicated parts. That's all I can say about it now.